Hello and welcome back to the Rosebeer YouTube channel.
Hello.
You'll notice we have a third person on the channel today. It's been a while since we had a guest.
Yes, it has.
So we wanted to say welcome to Will Battle, the author of the World Tea Encyclopedia, which the third edition has come out a couple of weeks ago. So that's very exciting.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks, Alan, for having me on.
You're very welcome. It's very good to have you here again.
It's lovely to be back in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. How's you got here today or?
I did. I got here to proper tea drinking weather.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, well, thanks. That's our weather segment for the day. It's awful. Don't go outside. It's very rainy, but yeah, as you say, perfect tea drinking weather. So today we're doing a little sit down interview and discussion about black teas in Africa. So you have to bear with us because we do only have two little microphones, so we'll be passing between us.
Really pleased to have Will here again. He's already done 2 events with us in the last 10 years in Brunsfield and here in Clark Street. And tonight we'll be doing another event on Japanese teas in Brunsfield. So really looking forward to hearing about Japan tonight. But today we're actually going to talk about Africa. And we're going to complete our series of black teas. We've done 5 videos so far covering black teas in all regions of the world. And we left Africa for Will's arrival. So today we're going to talk about black tea in Africa.
Well, thank you for saving the best till last.
So, Will, tell us about how black tea got to Africa and tell us the history of it.
Yeah, well, black tea in Africa, or tea in Africa, is actually the history is quite young relative to Asian tea, even Asian tea as planted by Europeans. The first tea bushes in Africa actually really appropriately were in Malawi and had come from the botanical gardens. Seeds come from the botanical gardens in Edinburgh.
Really?
So it's a really appropriate location to be talking about the genesis of African tea. And Malawi is really the first country in Africa, then Nyasaland, that got going with tea. The first bushes really started to come into bearing in the early part of the 20th century and then sort of accelerated from there. And I think really Malawi was the dominant industry in Africa for quite a lot of the 20th century. And there's a great heritage, Scottish heritage really in Malawian tea, as in lots of the world's tea. And then we've also got Kenya, where the first bush was about 1903 in Limuru, which is just up from modern day Nairobi. Nairobi hardly existed then, but the first bush is 1903. But Kenya really got going in the sort of post-war period, really grew a lot in sort of 1950s onwards. And it's probably not worth forgetting some Portuguese influence. Mozambique, the first teas in modern day Mozambique were planted in the 1920s. And up until sort of the 1970s, Mozambique was a massive player in African tea, really grew a lot of tea, or it had a lot of area planted with tea, but relatively low yields.
Yeah.
But the Civil War really hampered Mozambique's progress as a tea producer.
Yes.
So perhaps those 3 were to the fore in Africa in its early days, and really notable industries in Tanzania, largely driven by companies like Brook Bond, Uganda, Rwanda and Burundi. Those really mainly though, if you think about African tea, it's really sort of sort of Central Eastern Africa are the key places around the lakes.
Absolutely. So the British side of Africa.
Yes.
So the tea we're drinking is actually an African tea. It's our Mount Kenya. And I'm going to ask the author of the World Tea Encyclopedia to give his opinions and taste notes on the tea.
This is a Kangaita Peko from those sort of southern slopes of Mount Kenya. Really beautiful tea growing country. It's volcanic soils, but laden with humus. And they're just really fertile. Really comparatively recently planted clonal bushes. So they will make really good tea and they'll yield well.
Yes.
And and it's a KTDA factory, Kenyan Tea Development Agency, which is the smallholder parastatal. Really good. It's owned by the smallholders. And it's a really, really good institution for processing green leaf into black tea. It does it very well. And in this part, the east of Rift part, they make really, really good teas on a very fine plucking standard, 2 leaves into bud exclusively.
Absolutely.
Really good quality leaf, processed expertly.
Wow. I felt very under pressure there because I brewed the tea and I was like, oh no, I really hope I did it properly. I didn't taste it beforehand. I should have checked.
It's actually quite a popular tea with our customers, and both the customers who drink their black teas black or add milk. It really works both ways.
Yeah, it's perfect, isn't it? It's very flexible. Very flexible. It's an orthodox African tea, which we'll come to later, but that's relatively rare. And it does work brilliantly in black teas drunk in the continental style or in the perhaps a British style.
Well, sort of speaking of the British style, I think one of the things that we wanted to ask about was sort of the colonial impact on the tea industry in Africa. I suppose you say you said the British side and then sort of the Portuguese influence and things. The sort of empire and colonial history that comes into the geography must have affected it a lot, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think the then Portuguese East Africa accepted, the early tea industries were all in British colonies. I think perhaps Tanzania, when it first grew tea, then Tanganyika wasn't, and was actually German. But essentially, they were making tea for the British consumer. And in that respect, they were making the sort of teas that you'd really find in Sri Lanka or India around that time. So orthodox tea that is this. It's a slightly more gentle way of processing. For those who haven't seen it, it sort of mimics what I'm doing with my hand in the rubbing of withered leaf in order to expose the leaf cells to oxygen. And you end up with quite a gentle process, quite complex, mellow tasting teas. And that was the predominant style, which sort of aped what they were doing in India and Sri Lanka around that time. So sort of consistent with other empire teas in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s. But then you start seeing from the sort of mid-50s onwards, more and more CTC tea coming into East Africa, in particular East and Central Africa, but really East Africa. That is this slightly more aggressive way of breaking up leaf cells in which leaf is simultaneously cut and torn. And that can get a lot of extraction, and it gets you a lot of richness and strength in the brew, but perhaps a little bit less complexity. And so really what's happened is the industry's followed the growth of the tea bag in making the sort of teas that work well in tea bags. And so from the mid-50s onwards, more and more CTC tea being made in East Africa, and a similar interpretation called LTP, which you got in Malawi around the same time. So that's how it's developed, and it's sort of mimicked what the markets wanted over here.
Talking about following the market, I guess now that the market for tea bags is not so healthy, that they're producing a lot more orthodox teas now.
Yeah, the market for tea bags is still very healthy globally, but perhaps the British market as a proportion of the world as a whole is less significant. So that's the answer is the same. Yes, they are making a lot more orthodox tea. They can satisfy the demand from the Middle East and from the old CIS states, because they're also really keen to have orthodox tea.
Absolutely.
So there definitely is mimicked. It's sort of played to where the demand sits.
Yes. You've worked across Africa. Tell us about what first took you there, and really what keeps you going back there. What are the stories?
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough to have a traineeship with Tetley in the late 90s, and they had still do have a brilliant training program, and that involved spending about 6 months in Africa, about 4 months in Kenya, 2 months in Malawi. So I went over there for training initially, and training involved this fantastic exposures, really, tasting the teas that were coming up in the weekly tea auction in Mombasa, and then in Limbe in Malawi. That was tasting thousands of teas a week, an enormous amount of teas. and then grading them and valuing them and making sure that you knew whether or not you could use them in your blend. That I found that was a brilliant experience. Going to the auction to buy tea then when it was all open outcry auctions, that is a terrifying but exhilarating process as well. This sort of the task of buying your own tea at the best price, but also making sure your competitors were not getting away with cheap tea. So bidding them up and trying not to get landed with the lot of tea yourself. I found that process just such amazing fun, but terrifying in equal measure, certainly at the beginning. And I wouldn't pretend I did it very well, but it was really enjoyable. And going to see producers as well was probably the greatest pleasure, just going up country and meeting people and understanding how tea is grown and just witnessing the enormous skill that sits in those tea makers in tea factories in Kenya, Malawi, all over. Those experiences were brilliant, and it's difficult to sort of represent the experience of walking into a tea factory for the first time, but an
incredible aroma.
And it's so persuasive aroma. I think there's some statistic, isn't there, about how much more enduring smell is than some of your other senses.
Yeah.
And to experience that just constantly was a real joy. All sorts of experiences over there. And then I was lucky enough I sort of fell in love with Africa a bit anyway, but keep going back. And I've consulted over there. I did some consulting in Rwanda a few years ago. And Rwanda is one of these countries that is really producing the best tea in Africa, I'd say. It's really grown. The amount of investment that's gone into the country is incredible. And it's lucky enough to possess sort of tea making terroir and new bushes and brand new factories that are making really fantastic tea. Nice. So to be able to go back there showed me the enthusiasm and level of investment that's going into African tea at the sort of the cutting edge of the tea industry. So I've had a few trips back there, and I constantly drawn back, really.
I understand.
I suppose another question, is quite interesting, sort of talking about Rwanda and like the sort of modernization, how they're changing and how different places are developing their tea production. Do they face sort of socioeconomic or environmental challenges when they're making those changes?
I think Rwanda is perhaps slightly unique because Rwanda's making really, really very, very good tea in the African context, and they're getting a very good price for it. So there's relatively speaking more money in the Rwandan industry to remunerate its staff and its workers. I think perhaps the bigger issue that tea in Africa in general faces is global overproduction. Tea has been an enormously successful smallholder crop all over the world. It works well as a smallholder crop because it's an evergreen and it gives you a little bit of harvest every week. Certainly in Kenya, which is on the equator, you can really go and pluck the same bush every week or the same part of your garden every week. Yeah. And that makes it really compelling as a smallholder crop relative to something like coffee, which is a fruit. You've got your one annual crop, and I'm not really directly comparing tea and coffee, but it's more difficult to budget when you've got that coffee annual sort of bonanza for a week and then nothing for a year.
Yes.
So tea is quite good in that respect, and it's been quite the cultivation of tea has been encouraged, but that's created a very big smallholder sector that arguably has grown too much tea, and that has depressed prices as well. It's not really anyone's fault that we're in this situation. There's just too much tea out there, and it's difficult for the market to sustain prices that are able to pay really top-end wages. So an example of this would be that the KTDA, the smallholder organisation, the KTDA gardens in Kenya were compelled that they would get a minimum price a couple of years ago. And that just encouraged more overproduction for tea, which no one was prepared to pay the minimum price for because it wasn't good enough. So it's difficult to know the answer to the question of how to address those challenges, economic, social, and environmental. But I think the economic one is at the forefront, because where there's enough money, then some of the other ones are more easy to resolve, really. But addressing overproduction is a question that the industry's grappling with, not just actually in Kenya, but perhaps in other parts of the world as well.
It's great that we're supporting these smallholders, actually. Yeah. But we've spoken about the history of black tea in Africa and where we are now. What about where we're likely to be in the future? Which countries are going to do what, in your opinion? And do they have to take into account climate change, things like that? So what, in your opinion, will happen to African teas in the next decade, say?
Well, that, if I knew the total answer to that, I really would potentially, I could be a rich man, perhaps.
Exactly. You'd know how much to bid in those auctions.
But I think one area that is worth talking about is Malawi.
Okay.
The one estate in particular, Satemwa Tea Estate.
Yeah, great estate. Yeah.
Really lovely estate, still family owned, and it's also with a great focus on a diverse sort of set of produce. So what I love about Satemwa is they are making fantastic tea bag tea, really good quality tea, but also really nice specialty tea that work well in any tea shop or online. And we see quite a lot of that going into premium brands across the UK and overseas. And then also a diversified approach to offer smallholders the option of non-Camellia sinensis products. So things like peppermint, hibiscus, lemon verbena, those sort of products, as well as orthodox tea and something called smoked guava, which is a bit like a lapsang souchong, and a number of different oolongs and pu'er type products. And I think that is exciting because with a growing specialty sector in this country, Satemwa's offerings fit perfectly into that. And they also are sort of trying to encourage smallholders to focus a little bit less on growing tea and on growing other dollar crops that are a great way of taking people out of a sort of dependence on tea, which I think is all a really good part of the story of reducing overproduction and focusing on some of those other things which are really in demand over here.
Well, thank you very much, Will. So there we've been talking about black teas in Africa, and then at the end talking about herbal teas. Tonight we'll be talking about green teas in Japan in a Bruntsfield store. So hello to everyone who came to that event, because this video will come out in a few days after the events. But one more thing we should mention, I think we briefly mentioned it, is that one of the reasons Will is here is that the new edition of his World Tea Encyclopedia was launched, was it the week before last?
Yes, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. So, well, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's been quite an effort to get it out there and keep it up to date.
Yes.
And I set out to write a tea encyclopedia because I used to love reading wine books, wine atlases.
Yeah, so do I, actually.
And the great wine writers have a really good way of communicating I'm definitely not putting myself in that category, I hasten to add, but in a really accessible way that makes you want to go and discover what they've just written about. And I wanted to try and do the same thing, to encourage people to explore tea in a bit more detail and regard it in the same way as we regard wine, and to be prepared to find good quality tea and pay a bit more for it and support those producers who are making nice tea. So that was the idea, and hopefully by coming to your talks in the shop and by reading it, people will discover a little bit more about what's out there that they hadn't previously thought of.
Yes. And I think the fact that it's the third edition shows that it's a very successful tea encyclopedia.
Thank you very much, Adam. It's the only tea encyclopedia.
Thank you very much, Will. Do we know what we're going to do next?
I don't believe so. We need to consult. We need to look at the drawing board.
Yeah.
But we're always inviting comments and things, but people have been waiting for this last episode of the Black Tea series for quite a while now. So
they have actually. That was we probably did the Black Tea season maybe 2 months ago now. We did the last video.
Took quite a break.
Yeah,
we've done a lot of like herbal. I mean, that's interesting about the sort of Malawi increasing in the different herbal ingredients and things, because we've been talking a lot about health benefits and stuff, and the other genres of teas that we do here as well. But yeah, I mean, we'll take comments and that sort of thing. But we hope that you really enjoyed this probably slightly longer video this week. It was really interesting to hear from you, and
thank you for having me.
We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for listening.
And Adam and I will see you next week.
See you next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.